This session is a continuation of the linked open data and digital library theme and will be conducted by Professor Paul D. Clogg. Paul Clogg is part-time professor of search and analytics at the Information School, University of Sheffield. Paul conducts research in areas including information seeking and retrieval, data analytics, and natural language processing, text analytics. Paul is also head of data science for Peak Indicators, a UK-based business intelligence and analytic company, where he is helping to develop data products and services, produce educational resources, and grow the data science capability within Peak Indicators. So with this, I hand over this entire session to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Great, so we're going to start our final technical session for today. And we've got 3 speakers that are going to be presenting. 2 will be here, and then 1 is going to join us remotely, all being well. So we're going to start straight away because we're quite short on time. We want to finish relatively early. So our first speaker is Enno Meijers. Enno works for the Research Department of the National Library of the Netherlands as an advisor in information networks. And according to his CV and his bio, he's worked on various projects basically around building digital infrastructures and research infrastructures within humanities and social scientists. So Enno, I'd like to welcome you up, and he's going to give a talk which sounds great, Building the Dutch Digital Heritage Network, based upon his experience at the National Library of the Netherlands. Thanks, Enno. Let's welcome our speaker.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to start off with thanking the NDLI organization for inviting me back to the KEDLI conference. I was here 2 years ago, and for some reason I must disappoint you basically because I'm going to still tell the same story. Only I'm very happy that in 2 years I can now show some results and first learnings of that. So I will start off with a short introduction, and I thought, well, maybe I should shortly point out where the Netherlands is, because I'm not quite sure if everybody is really aware of where the Netherlands is. Very small country, living positioned next to Germany, England, and close to France. And it's very different from India, and I really like to point it out because I have no idea how our results are really transferable to the situation and the context in India. I noted that there is one thing that we have in common, that we have roughly the same density of population, and that was something surprising to me. If you look at, for instance, the number of libraries according to the IFLA, we see that there's really a big difference in the number of counted libraries through the IFLA statistics. So, having that said, I think I will show the work we are doing, and I'd like to hear what parts of it could be interesting for the NDLI and the other digital libraries we've been talking about. Already in the panel yesterday, we talked about one difference in approach. We're not talking about in the Netherlands for the digital heritage about one central library, but we're really looking at a network that has many outlets to the people, and we're really thinking about organizing a real close-knit network for digital heritage. So it's really a different approach. The contents of my talk will be firstly about the national strategy we have and the vision in that, how we translated that into principles for building the network, and how are we at this moment in a program for building and implementing those principles in technical solutions, and the lessons we learned from that, and the next steps we will see on this road. So, I have a few demos on the end, so I like to keep my tempo high, so bear with me. My presentation is already on Twitter, on my Twitter handle, Enno Meijers. Like that. So I try to point to as many links online as there are possible, so you can find documentation, and a reasonable amount of that is even in English. So this is the National Digital Heritage Strategy. It's been written in cooperation with our Ministry of Education, Culture and Science, and we have a mixed combination at the ministry, and I think that's really an advantage in several, from several points of view. And together with representatives of the national, of the libraries, of the archives and the museum, we sat together and said, okay, let's see how we can increase the social value of our heritage information in the Netherlands. And the strategy describes cross-sector, so over the different communities, a cross-sector infrastructure where digital heritage is brought together. And it's really an inclusive program, so it's not about the national institutes working together, but it's really building the network in all levels. So we have local organizations, we have regional organizations, and we have national organizations, and we're really building a program to make them work together in a better way. But like I said, the Netherlands is a small country. In total, we talk about a cooperation of about 1,500 organizations, which is compared to India really small scale. And I must say, it looks like a small number, but if you have to deal with them, it's still a tough job. So, very different institutions with different IT environments, and also different goals for their organization and different funding schemes. So they get money from all kinds of different directions. After the strategy being written and we started working, there is a reasonably small funding for the national program, and the idea is that with that funding we can leverage the operations of all the institutes, so they will be more aligned. But we need to move fast, so the ministry decided last year that we will get some extra funding for 2 years in order to speed up the process. So currently we're halfway in a program that is outlined in really a lot of projects, and it's divided through projects that are facing the visibility of heritage information, the usability of heritage information, and the sustainability of heritage information. And sustainability is really about all the preservation challenges and the way we could really work from the network in order to get a better level of preservations for all institutes. The visibility is really about how we approach the user, how do we work together, how can we set up a national campaign for the public. We call it the Memory of the Netherlands, being a branding of all the things we do. But we're also doing studies on the usage and the rights problems, like we discussed before here as well. And apart from that, we also have a supporting program for the network, and it also includes people at the regional level that are being instructed and trained and informed about all the designs we have, the plans we make, and we provide them with tools to operate in their network. So it's really a networked organization. My talk will be mainly about the things we do in the usability domain. And aside from this, together with the ministry, we're also working on a reference architecture. And the basis for the reference architecture is tied to a reference architecture of the Dutch government itself. So we are a daughter of the reference architecture of the government. And this is a reference architecture for the digital heritage domain. And it's really about the goals for working together, how we translate it to operational goals, what principles we should follow in order to deliver to that goals. And this document is based on version 2, and we're actually working on releasing version 3. So it's a continuous process of detailing the reference architecture into standards, into interoperability, declarations or ways of achieving better interoperability. There's also a link to an English summary of this reference architecture. Apart from this, we're also really engaging the network, and I think we have a great campaign. We had a one-pager as a manifesto that you comply with principles of the NDE network. So we ask organizations to sign the manifesto and really become part of the network. And then we sent them a large cake. And the fun thing is they have to eat in the organization with all the personnel, with all the people working there. And that creates a moment where they have to tell, why do we have cake today? Well, that's because we're part of the network now. And I think that's a fantastic job my colleagues from the communication did. The second part is really how, for the usability layer, how are we translating, or what is our vision for building this network? And we start really from the user perspective. So in our view, if a user is online, encounters heritage information, then it shouldn't matter where the user journey starts. That's basically the idea. And we should provide the relevant links and the relevant context to find the next steps and next pieces that are related to what he finds. She finds, I learned. And users start at Google, and especially for long tail, you often don't find a lot of our information. And sometimes because it's not there, but I think more often because Google is not really interested in showing the title of a book, because it has too little context and too little value to show it in the search results. So what we have been doing in the Netherlands, and that we've been doing that for at least more than 10 years, we've put a lot of effort in building portals that show heritage information from a certain perspective, from the perspective of a region, from a thematic, like Second World War is a thematic portal on the right one down. From a type of material, so we built all these separate portals. But the difficult thing for the user is which one to choose for my information query. And if I choose one, will I find the related information that is available in the other portals, or do I need to search all the portals to know that I have found what's there online? That's one problem. The other problem is that for building these portals, we built a large infrastructure, and we often keep building that over and over again. For each new portal, we start again doing the same things, and that is something we really like to think about in a different way, and I'll come back to that. So what we said, we'll try to go back to the source, and so the institution has a collection, publish its collection, and we should really think about the maximum usability of the collection at the source. And for that we try to implement linked data principles and make as much as connections to well-known definitions for places, for persons, for topics, for time periods, etc. So it's a really important part of our strategy is really go back to the source, and I really like the quote from, it's actually from Ruben Verborg, professor at the University of Ghent, and he says you can only be free if you follow rules, and I think that's a very basic principle for interoperability. If you really want to be interoperable, then you need to comply with what the rest of the world understands, and I think that's it's a really important one. For this work at the collection management systems, we really depend on the adoption through the IT vendors, and so we're really focusing on the vendors instead of the institutions, and we're working together with the institutions in order to pressure the vendors to go this way, and that's I think a promising strategy, because if you have the functionality in the system, then it will be spreading around through the other systems in the end, through the other institutions as well. But of course, at the network level, we also need to provide some services. One thing is we spend a lot of effort on getting all the reference sources, the terminology sources available for the network in the same usable way, the same as we do with collection information. So we have there are a lot of thesauri and other reference databases, but they're usually inside the institutions, and if they're there, they're hardly ever shared. So we're really pressing the organizations that maintain them to publish them as linked open data as well. So this is basically the scope of our direction. We, for this period of intensification, as we call it, but that's a really ugly English word, but the intensified period, I will call it. We have projects that are on this roadmap, and it's about improving the usability of the data sources, facilitate the service for finding shared terminology, but also create a transparent and machine-readable overview of all the information that there is, because in the end you want search engines to learn about your network and the data that is available in the network. The idea of creating a linked data network and then the problems are solved is, of course, a faraway vision, and we will maybe never reach that far. So at the same time, we're also working on the current aggregation infrastructure, and if you publish your data in a standardized way using linked data, then if you aggregate the data, then the result becomes better because you have better data to start with. So you improve also the data quality of the current aggregation process. So that's also a focus area. But on the same time, we try to do some serious investigation in federated querying, in discovery techniques that are not based on aggregation solely. So like I said, we really look at the IT vendors, and in the Netherlands luckily we only have 5 big IT suppliers for collection management systems, and they hold over 90% of the market, so that's quite interesting to start with them. And I must say we've been talking with them for a long time, but now with this program we also have funding to do implementation projects, and so basically we can put some funds in order to develop the functionality that will be implemented in an organization as a showcase, and that's how we try to get the wheel turning. That's basically the idea. But at the same time, we use all kinds of different techniques. We call them wrappers, or the style sheet approach, and even intermediate platforms to transfer the data from one point to the other. So that's really a mix of solutions we look at. And I must say, compared to 2 years ago, I see that we're already we're quite moving ahead with the publication of linked open data from the sources. And it's very interesting because it seems it's really the network effect. If you're the first one, then it's not very interested, but as soon as more people start doing it, then the interconnections become more interesting. So we see that really happening. In order to show what's really there, we started to work with a technique we call data stories. It's from an idea from a Dutch company, actually, Triply it's called. And they provide an open source library in order to build presentations of results for linked data queries. And I can do a short demo on this. Yeah, this is live. This is a story about from an artist database. An artist, we saw it also in one of the screens in the previous presentation, the RKD artist thesaurus. And this is just a query, and I can show you the query. I don't know if it's readable. It's about the artist called Jan Torop. And with the results of the database, we can show, for instance, because it's in that database, for all the places where this painter has worked during the time. But another thing is connecting this linked data to the wiki data through the sum of all paintings data. You can also make a list of all the places where you can find work of this painter. And I sorted them in the order of the maximum number of paintings found in those institutes. So if you're really interested in the painting, you should go to these museums. Another thing is finding books in the National Library that have the subject about this painter. So and that's all done real time based on these queries, and people can you can go to this site and you can if you change this text here and you select another artist, and you get the same result for another artist. So you can really play with this. And this is helping us, also the institutions, to show them what you really can do with the data, and how their data can be used in order to create different stories. But a very important thing is to really, that the data is being connected to the references, like I said before. And we use definitions for places, for persons, for time periods, for subjects. And they're sometimes maintained within the network, but sometimes they just come from, and probably even a smarter thing to do is use from geonames or for Wikidata. And instead of aggregating all these terminology sources, all the data from there, we made a small search interface, API, that just does a real-time search on all the different sources, and we made a small piece of software that has all connectors to all different sources, including the Getty and GeoNames and Wikidata, and then you can search on that, and I can demonstrate it. This is a query. I add another source to it, and I see a new result coming from actually our Sound and Vision Institute. This is also live, and you can follow the link in the presentation. And this is a proof of concept, but the idea that you don't aggregate all the data and then build a service with it, but you just do a real-time service over the internet. This is really illustrating the way of thinking we have for building this network. Another topic is where is all the information, and what we did so far was doing an inventory of all the data in 22 aggregation platforms we have in the Netherlands. We just pulled out all the information about organizations and data set and tried to match them. And we recently built a result, and we're still quite in the mist about how many collections we really have, what the data set is, what's the version of the data set. And basically all that information is not really there. There's now, organizations spend very little time on defining the data set and put additional metadata to the data set itself. So that's a really big issue. And also data sets and organizations just should have a URI you can point a piece of software to. So one of the things we did is make a data model based on DGET and Void in order to see to really model the information we have about the register, the data sets. And we see that as a registry you can query in order to find out what kind of data sets are available. And for the registry, that's there will be a very tough decision we have to make, because it's a very logical thing to just build a registry and say, okay, here are all the data sets that we have in the Netherlands in the digital heritage domain. And there are many data set registries there. There's a European Open Data Registry. We have a Dutch Open Data Registry. There are many registries. And whenever I'm in the registry, I'm really disappointed because the information is not up to date, or the links aren't working, or it's not in the format I'm looking for. So we really try to think of a way to do this also distributed, to really, as you publish your information on your website, you should also be publishing your data about your collection directly in the net, so it would be findable and constantly real-time updated. And we don't have a solution yet. I probably think that we work with a number of decentralized registries that are kept by certain organizations, that maybe per domain, or so per one for all the libraries and one for all the archives and one for all the museums, something like that. But ideally, you want to really go into a more distributed model. Same applies for the aggregation landscape, what I was telling about. What we're doing there is really think about what kind of things happen within an aggregator, and what is really the role of which party. So I think the presentation, indexing, and the duplication of data is really something that's really in the area where you provide the service. But standardization and enrichment should really be more closer to the data source provider, because the way we work with it now is that the data provider hardly ever profits from the work that's being done in the aggregate. It hardly ever goes back to the data provider again. So we are thinking, and we're talking with all the aggregators and all the stakeholders in this area to see how we can improve and make a more efficient network of aggregation, actually. As part of that, we're also doing a pilot with Europeana, and we're looking at if you publish your data as linked open data in schema.org, is that good enough for Europeana to feed the EDM, the European data model with that? And it looks very promising. We did some pilots, and actually at the moment, as part of the Common Culture project we have in Europe, we're doing this with several other countries as well. And I think it makes sense because publishing it as schema.org is very important for your visibility for Google and other search engines. And if you also can do the same action also, if you can use it also directly for providing information to Europeana, then we don't have to do something special for Europeana. And I think that's a very interesting point. So, if you're interested, please have a look at our GitHub and send me an email or whatever email address you find in there. And let us know your thoughts and your questions, because we're happy to share all experience we have. We're only halfway, and to be honest, the 2-year period, in all the projects we defined that we will have a fixed design of the solution, and we won't have the implementation of the solution. So we'll be working on this for the next, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 years, and I can say it here, I don't, it's not something I'm saying aloud in the Netherlands because they, but I think that's realistic. It's a lot of work, and actually, yeah, that's part of the lessons learned. I thought it was on the next slide, but it's not. So there's still a lot of work to do, and especially building it in a really decentralized way is really a challenge, and I think we still need a lot of technological solutions to do this the right way, and we're also engaged in research projects from the University of Ghent and others to see how we can find the right solutions for them. And in general, we really like to think that we're surfing a bigger wave, actually. We try to avoid making special solutions for the Dutch Digital Heritage Network, because I think that's too small. Thank you. I think that scope is too small. I think we like to really follow the principles of the web and trying to find out how can we comply with the principles and improve our network in implementing those principles. And one of the things we're doing is working together with projects for research infrastructures in the Netherlands for the digital humanities. They work roughly on the same basis. They're also working on implementing linked data principles there. Partly they're using even the same data coming from the same organizations. But we're also talking to other organizations, and especially, of course, in the public domain, like we discussed extensively in the previous slot, working together with Wikipedia, Wikidata, and in general, I think, and that's actually a real discussion we started, is what is the natural role for that? What should be with the institution, and what should be in the community, and how can you work together, and how can you both make each other stronger? That is really the thing we need to find out. And in general, I like to point out the contract for the web, which has been published by Tim Berners-Lee 2 weeks ago, and it's actually a call to adopt the principles for a an open and, as he calls it, a good web, whatever that really means. And interesting, there already, last time I checked, there were over 80 organizations that signed it among Google and Facebook. So it's easy to sign it. But what they will do is check within 2 years, I thought, and then see if they really comply. And if not, they're removed from the list. So it's an interesting initiative, I think. So that concludes my presentation. And yesterday we talked about the hackathons in the panel, and of course the software as a result of the hackathons is usually very not really usable. It's more about the creative ideas that come up, and we have actually a very successful hackathon. We ran that 2 weeks ago, so I'm still exhausted, to be honest. And there are two things that are really important about doing these things. And for one thing, it is that we do it every year, and it becomes now a very important moment in time to have your data available as institutions. So we have seen a number of institutions in the last months that said, like the artist source I showed, was published 3 weeks ago. We have another source that's really been, so it's really a thing to have your data available for the hackathon. And I think that's an interesting thing. The other one is that the people that are present in the hackathon, and we run it for 24 hours. They're just, we try to to keep them awake. It's not always happens, but. It's very interesting because relations are created there. People are working together, are getting to know each other, and are keeping contact the rest of the year. So you're really building a network of people, and I think that's really important to really make it successful. So that's my conclusion. Okay.
Thank you very much indeed for that. We've got time for just some questions, if anybody's got any questions. So over to you. Any questions?
How do you integrate your museums with these digital platforms?
It's actually up to the museums how they build their data and how they align their data with the things we have available. One of the recent datasets was the dataset of the Rijksmuseum, which is, of course, our very important collections in the Netherlands. And they recently published their data as linked open data. Making linked data is one thing. It's not really, it's a way of transforming your data, but the essential part is, of course, making the links in the data, and that is still a thing that really needs a lot of work. That's why we're pushing the terminology sources. That's why we built this API, so it will be implemented in the collection management systems, that people, instead of the string Rembrandt, they will use the URI for Rembrandt. And of course, the Rijksmuseum has its own definition of Rembrandt, of course, and probably that would be the best one to have in our network so everybody can point to it, but that is still a lot of work to do, and we're in constant discussion, and we say, okay, you have such a good data, please make it openly available. And I hope that answers your question a little bit.
I saw some Google art project, and they have linked with some Dutch museums, so like Van Gogh Museum and Rijksmuseum also. So I think this project can also give certain visual impact, visual that any user can see the digital collections of these museums. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, we try to make it as transparent as possible and let people see what is there. Let every organization that wants to build a service for a special user group can just go out in the network and select all the pieces they need for their. There's an initiative from a number of museums to build a fashion collection with all different, and they even built their own fashion thesaurus as an expansion of the AAT from Getty because it wasn't detailed enough for describing all the clothes and they published it as linked open data, and other museums can build it. There's an initiative for building a platform around all the Van Gogh paintings that are separate in a number of museums, and we try to use the linked data principles to bring that together. But it's a lot of hard work, and it needs to be done at the source, and that is the challenging part, of course. So you really need to talk to them. It's important that you really do it through the standards, and then everybody else can use it. And that's why we built the examples, so people can look at it and get the idea. So.
Any more questions? Yeah, there's just maybe one more here. Maybe just to close on one question for me, Enno, in terms of the lessons you've learned, some of the challenges you've faced, what would you say, just very briefly, what has been the biggest challenge in implementing that strategy? We can think about this one.
The more big challenges, but I think a very hard one has to do with the policy level, because if you want to be a networked organization, you have to create value for the network, and that is not always aligned with what your funding party expects from you, because you have very strict goals, what you need to do, and you have to attract visitors, and you have to be visible. But being a part of the network and being a stable, really relevant part of the network is something that's not really in the mind of the policymakers yet. And I think that is the biggest chance we have as network. And that's a very tough one, because it really needs a kind of a culture change for that. So.
Great. Well, Enno, thank you very much for your talk. Let's say thank you to Enno.
Okay.